What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with the amazing Spider-Man, and he literally becomes Juggernaut in this story. Probably the most overpowered version of Spider-Man of all time, with the exception of Captain Universe Spider-Man. But this picks up, of course, in the aftermath of the last issue that we covered. And a little bit of a refresher here, as always, there'll be a playlist at the end of the video if you need to get caught up. That what happened here is that Spider-Man is battling a guy called Calyx. Essentially, he has what's called the Rot, which is essentially a kind of cosmic force that corrupts the souls of everybody that it comes across. The only way for Spider-Man to be able to defeat Calyx is to take on the power of the Juggernaut given directly to him by the daughter of Citak, the person who traditionally gives Juggernaut his powers. Citak, of course, being that person. And so this picks up in the immediate aftermath or the immediate conflict of that whole event. And what's interesting about this is that you have Doctor Strange and you have Doctor Doom who are watching all of this unfold. And while Doctor Doom is the new Sorcerer Supreme, and he's the one that set Spider-Man on this path, there is actually a bigger game afoot for the character of Doctor Doom himself. And Stephen Strange does not immediately figure it out, but figures it out later on down the line. Now, we'll get to that point here in a little bit, but initially, you pick up with Spider-Man and Juggernaut. Now, Kane Marco is well versed in having these powers. He knows what the power of the Juggernaut comes with. He knows what he's capable of. This is all new to Spider-Man. Now, it is cool to see Spider-Man and Juggernaut teaming up with each other, but this is all new to Peter Parker. And so that's why, as the two of them are having a bit of a conversation here, that initially Spider-Man wants to stay there and help everybody face off against all these individuals that are essentially possessed by the Rot. Because up until that point, when Calyx was kind of momentarily knocked out, that you had the X-Men fighting each other, right? They were all corrupted and twisted and so on and so forth. With them being back to normal, now the attention focuses on everybody else who's infected as well, keeping civilians from harming each other. But the funny thing about this is Juggernaut's smart enough to know that's where the main fight is. That's the guy you need to go contend with. And so what he does is he throws a fastball special. And it's cool because Spider-Man has never had this really done with him before. The fastball special, of course, as most of you guys know, is where Colossus throws Wolverine at a target. It's been a thing for the longest time, and fans absolutely love it. So seeing the Juggernaut pick up Spider-Man and just throw him like a bullet directly at Calyx is kind of awesome. But again, with Spider-Man wanting to stay here and wanting to deal with all of this, Juggernaut says, no, you need to go deal with Calyx. That's where the real fight is. This is your fight. You've got to contend with it. Now, the reality here, and something that a lot of you guys probably picked up pretty quickly, is that if Calyx really is possessed by this kind of living embodiment of entropy, but a being that imbues the very essence of corruption throughout the entirety of the universe, how in the world could Spider-Man beat a guy like that? Because when it comes to entities on that level, you can't really defeat him with like punches or anything along those lines. It takes incredible amounts of energy, and reality warpers only on the highest level to even stand a chance here. And so where Juggernaut walks off, Spider-Man kind of muses to himself for a second, right? And he says, the Juggernaut's footfalls are all I hear for a second, matching my heartbeat, the world slows. And I realize the big lug is right. I've done enough thinking, I know what the solution is. Nothing else matters. And so that's why he kind of prepares to make this final sacrifice, right? He says, this was a good life, once more from the chest, and just fires up, right? Literally just lunges using a magic spell that sends him directly up to Calyx. Now, at that moment, Doctor Strange starts to realize what's going on. Number one, yes, Calyx is possessed, but technically the fight is directly with the Blight itself. The Blight basically being this kind of cosmic energy that creates the Rot, that instills it in people, and is the one that directly corrupts people, and it's the one that directly corrupted Calyx. But Doctor Strange comments, he says he knows that striking the Blight is only a temporary reprieve. Without Citak himself, the only way to recast the casket, and that's when he starts to pick up the pieces. Now again, the casket was kind of like a dimensional barrier. It's what kept the Blight from entering into the universe. But when the Blight finally possessed Calyx, the son of Citak, and the Blight entered into the universe itself, Citak, for the first time in his existence, felt grief. And having experienced an emotion that he'd never felt before, he was literally paralyzed by it. He didn't really know how to process it or how to handle it. And so Doctor Strange watching all of this unfold is like, that's why you chose Spider-Man, right? When you became Sorcerer Supreme, this was supposed to be your fight. You were the one that was supposed to be facing off against the children of Citak in order to prevent the Blight from entering into this reality. But when you abdicated that responsibility and you gave it to Spider-Man, Spider-Man did what he could, but at the end of the day, he could not stop the Blight from entering. But you chose him because you knew of all the superheroes on Earth, he's the only one that wouldn't give up. And that's the nature of Peter, right? Peter's entire existence is, in truth, a pretty sad one, right? If you scale out from any one particular story in Spider-Man and you look at his entire history, he lost his uncle, he lost Aunt May a couple times, he lost his marriage to Mary Jane Watson. In fact, he had to sacrifice it. He lost his body and his entire spiritual essence to Dr. Octopus at one point in time. The guy's entire life has been nothing more than facing some of the most bleak circumstances, but always coming back from it. And so what you do is you switch over to the Crimson Cosmos, where the daughter of Citak is talking to him directly. And what's really interesting is she says, it's quiet. If it was not so terrible, it would be nice. But we must scare the quiet away with truth, Father. I have traded my immortality, my share of your crimson magics, to spare the life of the mortal champion so that he can save the Earth realm, including you. And again, Citak, never having encountered these things before, just asks, why? Right? Why am I immobilized, indecisive, confused? And again, when it comes to Citak as a being in Marvel Comics, you don't really see a whole lot of him, shy of a few stories where he pulled Galactus into his dimension and statements made by Doctor Strange that if Citak were to ever enter into the main Marvel universe, that he would be nigh unstoppable. By and large, the only real involvement with this character that you see is either the 8th Day storyline, the whole Octessence, and Juggernaut, and arguably his most powerful outside of his Tryon form when he's possessed by Citak, and stories like Fear itself, where Colossus traveled to visit Citak and then gained the powers of the Juggernaut after Cain Marco had chosen another god to basically give worship to. And so Citak himself being so OP, it's wild here. And in fact, some fans will not be receptive to this, right? Some fans look at Citak as just this immensely overpowered person that shouldn't really succumb to mortal emotions like love and fear and things like that because he's so far beyond it. But the thing about his daughter is she says, the unthinkable has happened. You have lost 6 of your children, their immortality, their essence, stripped away by blight in the form of Calyx. Humans call it grief. And in turn, Citak lashes out, right? Nothing can hurt Citak. And his daughter responds and says, no, the great Citak did nothing as his son killed his siblings and attacked his father. You are broken. And that's where Citak just says, make it stop, right? In her response, I cannot. This pain is inevitable, but maybe there is one who can help if it is not too late. Now, here's an important thing to understand here, right? That on the surface, it is a Spider-Man story, right? But more so than that, it's Joe Kelly writing a story about emotional intelligence, right? I mean, how often have any of us felt the pain of loss? And how great would it be in experiencing that pain if you could just shut it off, right? Just turn that off and just not have to deal with it for a little while. And then maybe deal with it when you feel like you're ready, right? Data from Star Trek and his emotion chip, but it doesn't work that way, right? We as human beings, we cannot compartmentalize emotions and we cannot compartmentalize how we feel. We have to deal with it as it comes to us. And Citak being so far removed from humanity, being so incredibly powerful that very few things can actually challenge him, for the first time in his existence, he's experiencing fear and he doesn't know how to handle it, really grief. And so in turn, you switch back over to Spider-Man and he says, horrifying as it is, the blight is a force of nature. It exists to cull souls from existence. Why? Might as well ask why there's gravity or muons or quasars. It doesn't matter. Doctor Strange figured out a way to hide our entire dimension from this thing, but it took the power of a god. It took Citak. I'm a kid from Queens who got a crash course in magic last week, but with the slice of power I got from a god's daughter, I think I can make it work. I can cast the casket of Citak continuously until I die. Literally, he's willing to sacrifice himself in order to keep the entirety of the universe safe. And that's what Doctor Strange realized. Spider-Man was the only one who would be willing to do it. But in the end, he's met by the arrival of Citak, who says, Failure is inevitable. Maybe not today, but with the power of my blood coursing through you, you can live 100 years. But the blight is part of the prime fabric of the universe. It will prevail eventually. And that's where Peter just kind of acknowledges that and says, I know. Right? Like, I totally get that this is a stopgap. I totally get that this is not going to keep this thing at bay forever, right? We can push it away. But the moment that I die and I cease to cast this spell, it's going to come back. The door's going to reopen, and then anybody who can't fend it off is going to be destroyed. But that's where Citak kind of cuts him off, and he says, the blight will prevail. Why do you fight? Why? When life is so fragile. And this is probably the most important part of the story. And it really shows that Joe Kelly perfectly understands the character of Spider-Man as he writes him, because Peter Parker's written to say, despite the magical craziness of the last few days, this is the only life I have. Most of the time, it's hard. It's not fair. Sometimes it flat out sucks, but it is my life. There's not another one anywhere like it. It's beautiful exactly because it is so fragile. Every life is like that. Even if in 1,000 years, my life and anything I ever did won't matter, it matters today. And so today is worth fighting for. And it's a profound statement. It is a very profound statement, right? Like, at any moment, we could just turn blue and fall over. And so every act that we commit to, every person that we love, every piece of food that we taste and we enjoy, it matters. It's important. Number one, because you can never get that moment back. You can never rewind. You don't get to start over, right? And just kind of do things a little differently this time. And number two, because everything we do has an impact on the people around us, and everyone has an impact on us, the 6 degrees of separation. And what he says is, with a view to the horizon of infinity, I do not expect you to understand, Citak, and I don't care. I'm alive, I'm fighting, just like everyone else. That for Spider-Man, it's the meaning and it's the purpose. It's the one thing Citak never grasped. But then he does. He pushes Spider-Man out of the way. And then you get this really, really cool monologue, right? Where he says, a reading from the book of the Vishanti. Earth's champion recalls that day and the words of the immovable god Citak. I hurt, he said, and I see no end to that pain. But if you can act in the face of loss, of your insignificance and fragility, then so can Citak. I will become the crimson casket that shields this world, this dimension, from the horror of blight. I will protect my remaining children, flawed as they are, and this world. This is the new covenant, not forged on a whim, not even forged by my own will. I make this pledge because I grieve, and I fear that without action, grief is all that will remain. On this day, Doom, Sorcerer Supreme, taught a god what it means to live, and forged the barrier that would forever shield our universe from the blight. Now, here's an important thing to understand here about what Joe Kelly's doing, and it's very easy to read between the lines. Joe Kelly effectively just wrote Citak out of Marvel Comics. That's really what he just did. By saying that Citak will eternally stay here in this place and keep the universe protected, he's no longer occupying the Crimson Cosmos, and so we will likely never see him again until someone returns him to the Crimson Cosmos. Now, at the end of the day, as long as Citak still exists, as long as he's still alive in some capacity, Juggernaut will likely continue to be able to channel his power. As long as he has the Crimson Gem, the abilities stay. So there's no reason to believe that Cain Marko will lose his power as the Juggernaut, but he's also free of the influence of Citak. He'll never be called back like he was during Eighth Day and forced to basically amass an army using 1/8 of the human population, and he'll never be possessed by Citak in the same way he was during the Tryon storyline, albeit neither of those have happened since they initially happened. But the fact is, Citak is no longer a part of the, canon Marvel universe. He is, but he's not. We may never see him again. And it's one of the things that I really haven't seen people talk about, but it's one of the most important things to take away from this story. I've seen Marvel do it a million times over the last almost 30 years. So the fact remains, right, that following this, Spider-Man just sort of goes back to his normal life, right? He's like, I never want to do magic again. I am done with this. And Doctor Strange's like, fair enough, right? I totally get it. You died like 7 or 8 times and all that kind of stuff. You were forced to endure some pretty hardcore circumstances. I totally get that you're kind of finished with it. And then following that, he just kind of makes his amends to various people who were out there that he had somehow wronged in various ways, right? When he was pretty cold and callous to Aunt May, when he was just super mopey and depressed when it came to Felicia Hardy, all that kind of stuff. You have Calix, who's basically locked away by his sister. She will likely become the new ruler of the Crimson Cosmos. And it's just kind of celebrating the lives of the people around him, as well as mourning those who were killed and who have passed away in all of this. Of course, Peter loses the power of the Juggernaut and goes back to his normal self. It's not a bad interim story. I mean, that's all this was. 8 Deaths of Juggernaut was just a way for Marvel to kill time until they can move on to like the next story of whatever it is that Spider-Man's going to be doing. I have no clue what it is, but it was a fun story. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. I enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.